If Bank of America would lend to black people, then white people would stop getting mortgages from them.
No, 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 no. We're talking about.
All right, what do you want to talk about?
So a lot of the comments you're making show a vague understanding of how sociological factors and socioeconomic factors create systems of poverty and like disenfranchisement within a nation, but they're very surface level, and I think that's what you're missing when a lot of these arguments come into play. And for instance, right, we live in a capitalist society, right?
Okay.
So capitalism is a system of monetary accumulation. You have land or some kind of value or service, and you use that value or service or good, land, regardless of what it is, to generate wealth and capital, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it is a system of competition. You compete against your neighbors, and that's what gives it its quote-unquote freedom and fairness, is that it is supposedly, we know this not to be true, but it is supposedly a meritocracy, right?
It's not just strictly a matter of competition. For example, a rising tide lifts all boats. So, for example, if specialization that comes through capitalism allows more food to be produced and more energy to be produced, even if you are falling behind what your neighbor's doing, your quality of life could increase because the rising tide's lifting all boats. So it's not a zero-sum game necessarily where there's only $100 million to go around, and if your neighbor doubles his worth, now you're worth half as much.
True. However, we understand when you directly agree with me that redlining was a thing, right?
When did it end?
Redlining never ended.
Okay, so explain. It's illegal, correct?
It doesn't matter if it's illegal if no one enforces the law, right?
Okay, so your argument is up until today, mortgage companies are still not giving mortgages to people of color.
So here's a great example of that. I'm in the service, right? I'm in the Army.
Okay.
I use Navy Federal as my credit union, right? Mm-hmm. Statistically, over the past, I say 45 years, this is what made me very reluctant to agree with to use them as my banking service. They have given out, on average, I think 60% greater acceptance rates for loans, for whether they be small business loans, whether they be household improvement loans. In general, they're lending, right? 60% more likely to approve people who had who lived in neighborhoods that were historically white. They were similarly with people who I want to make sure I'm quoting the study correctly. I don't want to give you any misinformation here. But they had a very, very easily trackable history of preferential treatment towards neighborhoods that historically Black people were excluded from. So that was
why. Why do you think? Let's without even delving into the stats, let's assume that's correct. Why do you think that is? Why would Navy Federal Credit Union do that? Because they hate Black people?
I mean, in the beginning, probably.
Well, that has nothing. Like, we're not talking about 1940. We're talking about you're talking about up until today.
Let me articulate myself just a little bit. So when I say in the beginning, yes, that probably may be the case. Now you have 50, 60 years in the future where people aren't, screaming fucking vitriolic racist. Now what they have instead is a set of codified practices that their business has been using as a model for 60, 70 years. And so if this has been a successful business model for you guys and you have no real reason to change it, why would you?
That's nonsensical, because here's why. Because what businesses are going to do, they're in the business of making money. And if you had all of in the high competitive world of sort of banking and mortgage lending, the idea that there is tons of money to be made off of lending mortgage applicants money in Black neighborhoods, and they're saying, we're not even going to consider it because we've always not done it, therefore it would be foolish to even consider it, is nonsensical. There would have been companies that would have stepped in and said, my goodness, this would be a huge economic boon to us. It would be very similar to things we see in competitive sports. So, for example, while it may have been a case in this country at one point that people would have said, I own a team, I don't want a person of color, once they realized that it was more profitable to them to allow people of color and it was an antiquated view, they certainly did that. And we see the results of that. They ended up with a lot of people of color, some being the most famous people in many of the sports that we see. The same would be true of these applicants. I would compose to you that the reason that they're not lending as much to, quote, not black people, but black neighborhoods is probably because those neighborhoods have other factors that mean that their investment would be more at risk, that they would be less at risk for property values to stay at the same rate or to increase in prices at the other places, or that those applicants would be less likely to be able to make the payments in a significant way.
So to counter argue what you're saying a little bit here, what you just stated was actually exactly what we saw. When you have a dearth of things like equitable lending opportunities from organizations like Navy Federal, things like that, you do see a competitor scoop in and take up that profitable venture. And that's where you get things like predatory lending. So what you're saying is entirely true, but what people are still doing is still thriving in the capitalist system. They see that people have limited opportunities to get equitable loans.
I don't understand what you just said there. Can you clarify? So your argument is that did happen, but they were predatory.
Yes.
So define predatory. So this is what it sounds like you're saying to me, that a bunch of people that shouldn't have gotten mortgages were given mortgages at rates that they knew they would be unable to pay back.
No.
Okay. Then I'm sorry. If you could clarify then.
So what I say is, you have people who are in an environment in which the main source for starting your own business. Ooh, wow, your chat is saying some crazy things. Anyway, my point being, you have people who are in an environment in which the main source for, quote unquote, lifting yourself up by your bootstraps, starting your own business, getting your own land to have generational wealth, all that good stuff. A very big part of that here in America is using either banks or some kind of federal program to acquire startup capital or some kind of fund investment to get that going. So, and then you have a very obvious like I said, this is a published study. I can send you some links for it here in a second, but you have very obviously discriminatory practices in these lending moments. And so you have people who have the main sources of these programs, things like that, being denied to them, have to find some way to get it. They're not just going to let themselves starve. They have to figure out some way to survive. And you have individuals who come in and they say, hey, I'll give you a loan, but this loan will be at a significantly higher interest rate, but it's one of your few options, right? So that's what I mean by predatory. It is.
See, I don't believe it. Just it intuitively doesn't make sense, right? Like, so what? No. So let me explain what it sounds like you're saying. So you have like a bunch of the traditional lending places like Navy Credit Union or Bank of America. These places that would be considered throughout most of the country your go-tos for mortgages. You would agree with that, right? There's what we would consider sort of the establishment type banks that generally do the majority of mortgages, right? And that's what you're talking about. These opportunities aren't given to black areas. Instead, there's other groups that have came in, and they're not as fair with their terms. So maybe a traditional mortgage rate would be like 6%, but they're going to offer you like 30% to black Americans. That's what you're saying?
Not to that extreme level,
right?
But
gotcha. Yeah, I don't believe that. Then that would imply that a shrewd. Let me tell you why. Because that would imply that a shrewd company like Bank of America could see the same data that you're seeing, or the Navy Credit Union, or any of the other legitimate lenders would see the data you're seeing and saying, "Oh my God." There is an entire market of people that are left completely helpless, that are basically being lent to by these predators. And these are good people with good returns, with good property values, that we would make money hand over fist and have almost no competition, because our only competition would be these predatory companies that we would easily be able to outcompete with the rates that we're giving to traditional people. Why would none of these traditional mortgage companies have ever done that? Is it because they're racist?
Yes.
I think it's nonsense.
It's not nonsense. Okay, so I have to ask you fundamentally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you not believe people can make detrimental decisions toward their business in a because of their own racial biases and prejudices? Do you not believe people can do things of that nature? Is it like...
No, that's possible, but the actual truth of today's world is the exact opposite of what you're intuiting. The truth of because the truth is the biggest credit that you have in this country is appealing to victimhood and things like DEI. So any company which is why Bank of America has announced that they will be giving no money down loans for homes to people of color, particularly black people. It's every major corporation knows that there is only a positive to singing the praises of diversity, to hiring people that are more diverse, and to working with people that are more diverse, and building a clientele that is more diverse. The idea that all of this virtue signaling going on, but in secret, it's all a bunch of racists that are running all the mortgage companies, and yet all of academia, all of the media that would jump at the chance to declare racism, particularly in high institutions like this, haven't been able to break the story. There's just none of them. There's no stories being broken by intrepid journalists at the New York Times that basically everyone running Bank of America and Navy Federal Credit Union are completely racist.
So where did I get this study from if no one's putting this data out?
Okay,
because that's my entire
okay.
point,
So
that
you
that's
have
it.
so you have a study now.
I have multiple studies.
Okay, let's say
okay?
you have 10. Let's say you have 10. Is your argument to me that it is just an open secret, that it's just blatant racism? That's the only reason. It's just blatant racism why these mortgage companies are choosing not to lend to black Americans. And yet, for whatever reason, a country let me finish real quick. For whatever reason, a country where our mainstream media is incredibly, insanely focused on race, they're just not making this a story. And the Democratic Party that's insanely focused on race, just not making it a story.
Sir, so your statement now directly contradicts what you were speaking on earlier, right? So when I say that there's studies of this, and there's a historical precedent for this, and then I say these things may not be fueled by vitriolic racists nowadays. However, these things have become a standard set of practices. That's me literally admitting that people may not be personally fueled by fucking hateful moments in the present. However, they have standards and practices that have already disenfranchised people.
We already went through this circle, right? We did, because I said, no, I don't believe that, because the idea these people, businesses, multi-billion-dollar businesses, are in the business of making money, and they're going to reevaluate their practices. They're not going to not look at like literally 20% of the country and the homes that are there just because, well, we've never looked at them before, so we're not going to do it. They're always going to be looking to expanding their business interests. And I said, so therefore it would make sense. They would see, oh, here are properties that no one's lending to, and we can make a large amount of money if we started lending to these properties. And you said, well, what happened was there were people that did that, but they were predatory. And I said, yes, but if that's the case, then the traditional companies like Bank of America would realize that that's a huge potential area for financial investment, and they would be interested in making that money and understand that they could outcompete the predators, so they would go in there. And so are you telling me the only reason that Bank of America hasn't done that is because they're racist at the top of them? And you said, yes, that's what I'm saying.
So you're misunderstanding what I mean by that, because when I say yes, they're racist, right? What I'm talking about is if you say, so you're a business and you draw up a chart of the city and you say these neighborhoods are quote unquote green zones. These neighborhoods have people who have traditionally incomes within 100,000 to higher range. They have, higher property values on average. All of these factors that you would consider when you're giving someone a business loan, right? You consider their assets and things of that nature, right? If you create zones that are green, red, whatever, and you say these are the places we want to target our business at, right? This is a standard practice that you create a quote unquote target audience for your product, for your business, for your service. And you say, this is what we're looking for because we know that this produces these results. What you're doing outside of that now is risk-taking behavior, right? You would agree that as a business, you first establish a target audience for your market. And then afterwards, you have things that you consider outliers that maybe you sometimes invest in if you have like extra startup capital, things of that nature. But you would recognize that most businesses have a target audience, right?
It's an interesting question. The way you're framing it, sure. So like if I'm Bud Light, I'm selling beer to a particular group of people. Would I potentially try to reach out to other groups? Sure. But
okay, so wait. I want to ask you a very serious question.
Okay.
Just following that that logic. What happened when Bud Light tried to appeal to another brand?
Didn't work out well for them.
Oh, that's crazy.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's just like, right. If Bank of America would lend to black people, then white people would stop getting mortgages from them.
No. We're talking about perception and backlash that came from people who had an inborn fucking vitriolic reaction to something. We're not talking about
that's a difference of that's the difference. There is a group that went outside their target demographic to the competing culturally opposite demographic versus a mortgage company that no one gives a shit sort of what their cultural references are. People that are going to Bank of America. It is true. It is true. I just want to be clear. I just want to be clear before we get this. What you're really trying to tell me right here is me, who theoretically went through Bank of America to get a mortgage for my home, wouldn't have went there if they lended you a black man money. I'd have said, oh no, they went outside my target demographic. Now they're lending black people money? Nope, I'll take my business elsewhere. That is laughable.
It's not laughable. It's something
It is.
Why do we have the term white flight then? Why is that a historic?
Because there are black neighborhoods where there is incredible amounts of animosity towards white people and incredible amounts of declining property values and crime.
Okay.
Okay.
So there's no historical precedent of black people moving into neighborhoods and then white people being in fear of their property values going down or fear of the quote unquote crime that black people bring and then moving out to the suburbs. That's not a historical.
It has happened, just like there's well, right, that has happened, but that's not just because of the color of people's skin. It's because oftentimes crime does come, right? Oftentimes it's not just any average black person that's coming. The black person that wanted to move on their own is one thing. A lot of times what happens is these communities are designated for things like Section 8 housing and affordable housing in suburban areas, and that intuitively brings people that otherwise wouldn't have been able to otherwise move to those neighborhoods. So it's not that you're bringing someone of a different skin color, it's that you're bringing someone of a different economic status. And many times there are things like increased crime rates, drug use, etc., that come with those sort of things coming into a neighborhood. Similarly, will you admit that a lot of times when white people try to move into historically black areas, they are denigrated and said that they are gentrifying the area, and so therefore they're told both ways that they have to accept if people move into their cities, it's wrong for them to want to move out, but if they want to move into black cities, that's also wrong because it's taking away culture from black people?
So you're misunderstanding what gentrifying is. It's an erasure of local culture, mate. It's not the same thing as a guy moving out into the quote unquote suburbs, right? So what we're talking about when we look at white flight versus gentrification is a perfect example would be a bunch of wealthy investors come into an area and they buy historical property that has like sentimental value to the neighborhood.
Okay.
And instead of respecting that historical value, they pave over it. They put a fucking Starbucks there.
Okay.
Now that's very generic and like metaphorical. But what I'm talking about is an erasure of the local culture there. Versus white flight being people fleeing almost entirely out of fear. When I talk about that fear, it's you assign an inherent value to people coming from impoverished scenarios.
That's true.
Which is it's faulty because poverty isn't self-created; it's created by systems within itself.
That's not entirely true. The problem is you take all agency away from people that are poor, and yes, you do, right? Because you're saying that it's created solely by systems. That's not entirely true. It's certainly true that systems can be set up to put people at a disadvantage, but the truth of the matter is you can't. Let me ask you: are you married? Do you have kids?
No, I'm sorry. I'm just reading your chat right now. I don't want to distract from this. I do want to continue on this. I don't want to go on a tangent, but you guys are very fucking racist people in your chat.
I don't give a fuck. Your opinion of what people are saying in my chest is relevant. I haven't been reading what's in the chat because I'm trying to give you the dignity of listening to your conversation. But you're probably full of shit. They're probably not being racist. It's probably just you imagining shit, just like you think the people running Bank of America are racist. And you'll make excuses why about gentrification, white people shouldn't come into your neighborhood, but they should not be upset if a bunch of Section 8 housing's put in their suburban area. Now, the question I have for you, are you a parent? Are you married?
Nah.
Do you have brothers, sisters?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Let's assume, do they live in an area that you feel is a pretty safe area?
Yeah.
Would you be happy if a bunch of Section 8 housing was put in and then all of a sudden open air drug use started to increase, small crime started to increase? Would that be something you were happy with?
So as a person who has lived in multiple different emotional backgrounds, right? I'm sorry, not emotional, economic backgrounds. I'm reading your fucking chat. This is crazy.
Hey man, I don't know what to tell you. If you can't continue the conversation with me, then I'll just let you go. It's not going to be fruitful for you to just keep saying I'm just reading your chat.
Man, hey,
okay. Here's what we'll do. Tell me exactly what was said in the chat that has you so upset. Go ahead, give me the quote.
So the conflation of local culture equals pair of shoes on a wire, right? So first off, that's disrespectful. Those shoes are there to signify someone who died in a
That's
tragic
bullshit.
way.
I
It's
see
not
shoes on
correct.
wires in my neighborhood, and it's almost
Yeah,
all white
yeah.
people.
So
And I,
when misusing a cultural phenomenon doesn't make the origin of that cultural phenomenon.
I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit
Wow.
that you're super offended that someone said about shoes on the wire. It is something that
My
tends to.
entire point is
If you
it's
saw,
basically-
if let me ask you, let's do this. If you were going through two communities and one you saw shoes hanging on a bunch of wires and the other you didn't, if you had to take a guess where you were more likely to see an act of violence in the street, which one would you guess?
That's so fucking arbitrary, mate.
Why is it
Sure,
arbitrary? You know the answer. So do I.
I do know the answer. I
Right.
do know the answer, right? And the answer is it doesn't fucking matter. It's not a real
No, that's
thing.
not the answer. The answer is you would probably say it's just something that's distasteful and it signifies a certain type of, even if it was thrown up by someone's sister whose brother died and those shoes are up there, it's still, in your words, would signify someone being shot and killed or someone killed before their time.
I don't say anything about being shot. It's just the memorial.
I
status,
said killed
man.
before their time. Most of the
No,
time,
you said shot. You said shot, and that's my entire point. You keep.
I said
applying-
shot or okay. Then how about overdosed on drugs? Was stabbed to death? Was hit in a hit and run? You're not throwing shoes over the wire because your grandma died of cancer at 76, correct?
You could be. You don't know.
Okay,
mate.
well that's a stupid cultural practice, and it still would signify if you
culture's
just
stupid,
if
but
you
I'm not
looked at the,
racist.
if you
Okay,
looked at the
sure.
data, I'm sure, and you said the people that or the communities that had shoes on wire, which is not something I've ever talked about in my life before, but I guarantee if you bore out the statistics, those communities with shoes on wire are probably more likely to have more police interactions than those without. I don't understand why that's something that you feel that it's a significant memorial and therefore we shouldn't be allowed to talk about the statistics behind what that may signify.
No, you're drawing connections that I never stated. I was just stating how your chat is deriding aspects of culture that don't have negative connotations and assuming that there's negative shit.
Well, it doesn't matter. It does have a negative connotation whether you want it to or not. Like for example, for example, if I said to you, there's a community that I frequent in Pennsylvania a lot that every other street has Confederate flags, would that have a negative connotation to you?
The difference between a hate group that
No.
literally
I
showed
just asked a
war-
yes/no question. Would that have a negative connotation?
You're drawing connections that
That's
don't
simple.
have
Why can't you answer the question? Why can't you answer the question?
Mate.
Why
You
can't you
can't-
answer the question? Would that
Because you're trying to simplify something that has a history of.
You're not. What you're doing is you're deflecting from you're deflecting from the answer because you know what the answer will be and you're not
Memorializing their
interested.
dead
Just,
family members to
just
a
give me a
bunch
yes or no. We'll stay here. We'll stay here. If I told you of a city in Pennsylvania here that every other street had a Confederate flag, would that have a negative connotation for you?
You're comparing.
I'll just if we can't get beyond this, this is fine. If we can't get beyond this, if we can't get beyond this, that's fine. I'll ask the question again. If I told you there was a city in Pennsylvania where every other street had Confederate flags, would you have a negative connotation with that?
Oh my goodness, this man.
Why can't you just say yes? Why can't you just admit yes?
Because answers aren't yes and no, black and white. Simple, mate.
It is that simple. When I'm at, you can say yes, but I think it's different because. You could say that.
Didn't I literally say that?
No, you refused to say yes or no. You didn't literally say. I'll ask you again. Would you have negative connotation if I told you there was a city in Pennsylvania where every other street had Confederate flags?
This isn't the point you think you're making.
It is the point I think. I'll ask you again. Notice how you still can't say yes or no. You still can't say it.
Dignify this bullshit trap.
I'll ask you again. If there was a city in Pennsylvania where every other street had Confederate flags, would that have a negative connotation to you?
Oof, brother. You really think you're holding my feet to the fire here and it's really showing you don't have a material
No,
analysis?
it's the problem is I'll get to the answer and then I'll show how bad faith you are. That city's called Gettysburg. You know what that is?
Of course I know the Battle of
Well,
Gettysburg.
so do you think that the woman that's the reenactor for the South that has a gift shop there that has a Confederate flag and the Northern flag and the Betsy Ross, is she racist? Is that
Probably,
negative
yeah.
connotation? She is.
Probably, yeah.
Okay. Well, that just shows that we should take a grain of salt of everything you say. Now, I would say, just like you said, oh, them saying the shoes over the line, they attached a negative connotation that wasn't there. That's exactly what you're doing with the city of Gettysburg. Exact same
No.
thing. You're literally
No.
doing what you're accusing others of. Yes. Now, you wouldn't just answer yes, no, because you're not interested in an actual good faith conversation. You're interested with arguing and trying to prove some point that's not there. I only wanted you to say, of course, Confederate flag, that would have a negative connotation. And I was going to give the example, well, sometimes there's times where that connotation might be surprisingly different than what you thought. For example, in the instance of Gettysburg, where it's a historical monument. The whole town is through
We shouldn't put up historical monuments to racist causes.
No, I disagree. I think that Gettysburg and remembering the Civil War is an important thing.
Again, we can disagree on this, sure.
Sure.
But explain to me.
We shouldn't throw shoes over power lines either, so I guess we're even, right?
If you really think a war fought over the aspect of slavery is the same as throwing shoes over a wire?
I think the idea of you getting on your high horse and being morally outraged because someone made the point that towns that have, or streets that have shoes hung over the wires symbol that there could be more gang or violence or some sort of violence there, and you being offended by that because it's a cultural practice that people have attached negative connotations, that yes, you attaching a negative connotation to a historical site like the Battle of Gettysburg and saying that there should be no celebration or remembrance of it is actually a dumber point on your side.
I firmly disagree. One of those is straight up a memorabilia towards hate speech. How can you
It is not a memorabilia towards hate speech.
What did the Confederacy stand for?
The Confederacy,
It's not hate speech.
but it stood for an awful lot. Slavery was certainly part of
Do me
it.
a favor. I'll go ahead and hop off your stream after you do one thing.
Okay.
Read to me the first page of the Confederate Constitution. Go ahead.
Why do I give a shit?
Okay. No, we're good, brother. That's all I need to know. They stood for a lot of things, but I won't read it out loud.
Are you denying that it also stood for that? I just said slavery was certainly one of them.
It's the most important thing. It's the first page of
So
their
what?
Constitution.
So,
So you don't think that's indicative of a hate group and that shouldn't be memorialized?
no.
Okay.
I
sir,
think
bye.
that I don't think that the city of Gettysburg, or it happens to be one of my favorite places to go, learning about the history of the Civil War and the toll it took on normal people in the North and South. By the way, most of the people in the South weren't beneficiaries of slave owners, right? And how all these people died on this battlefield, and there was acts of heroism and acts of disgust on both sides. And learning about that moment in our history, I think, is significant, and it shouldn't be erased. I don't think it should be. And I don't think that the woman who's a reenactor or the guy that drives the bus and tells you stories about heroic deeds of the Confederate soldiers or heroic deeds of the Union soldiers, I don't think those people are racist. And I don't think that we should hide that symbol. I don't. All right, you're out. Good call. I guess that's the end of that call.